My sister dumped her two crying children on my porch, demanded I babysit them for 8 weeks while she vacationed in Europe and drove off. When I packed them into my car to head to the police station, she arranged a violent home invasion to teach me a lesson. But my family made one massive miscalculation. They always treated me like the invisible, pathetic computer nerd. They had no idea I own one of the most ruthless cybersecurity firms in Atlanta. I deal with digital extortionists and corporate espionage every single day, so handling a few entitled relatives was incredibly easy. Before I tell you how I legally repossessed her fake luxury life and sent her arrogant husband away in handcuffs, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to burn bridges to protect your peace. Please share your story below right now. The tires of Jasmine's pristine white Range Rover screeched against the concrete of my driveway, shattering the quiet of my Saturday morning. I opened my front door just as my sister and her husband Caleb wrestled two massive hard-shell suitcases out of the trunk. Before I could even ask what was going on, Caleb dragged the heavy luggage up my walkway and dropped it heavily onto my porch. Jasmine marched right behind him, practically dragging her 8-year-old son Trey and 6-year-old daughter Kayla by their wrists. The kids looked exhausted and confused. Jasmine pushed them toward my door without breaking her stride. She adjusted her designer tote bag on her shoulder and looked at me with that signature entitled smirk she had perfected since childhood. "I need you to take the kids," Jasmine announced, as if she were ordering a latte at a drive-thru. "Caleb and I are flying out to Europe for 8 weeks. We are doing a marriage-saving vacation across Italy and France. Our flight leaves in 3 hours, so we have to go right now." I stared at her, my hand gripping the edge of my front door. "You are joking," I said. "You did not ask me. You did not even call to check my schedule. I am not watching your children for 2 months." Caleb pushed his expensive sunglasses up into his perfectly styled hair and scoffed loudly. "Come on, Chloe, do not make this a massive thing. You are single, you work from home. You literally have no life outside of staring at your laptops. You should be grateful for the company." The absolute audacity of this white man standing on my porch in the house I paid for, telling me I had no life, made my blood boil. "No," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "Take your children and leave my property right now. I am not your unpaid nanny. I have never been your unpaid nanny, and I am certainly not starting today." Jasmine rolled her eyes, let out a dramatic sigh, and turned her back to me. She walked straight back to the Range Rover. "I am not playing this game with you today, Chloe," she called out over her shoulder. "We are leaving. You can either let them inside or leave them out on the porch. Your choice." Caleb gave me a mocking little salute, jogged down the steps, and slid into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life immediately. Trey started crying, grabbing the edge of my shirt desperately. "Auntie Chloe, where is Mommy going?" he sobbed. Kayla joined in, tears streaming down her face. Before I could yell another word, Caleb threw the car in reverse, backed out of my driveway at top speed, and sped down the street. I stood on my porch, two terrified children clinging to my legs, two massive suitcases blocking my door, and watched the taillights of their car disappear. I pulled out my phone and immediately opened the family group chat. "Jasmine and Caleb just abandoned their kids on my porch," I typed rapidly. "Come back and get them right now, or I am calling the authorities." The 3 typing bubbles appeared instantly. My mother Yvonne was the very first to reply. "Do not you dare ruin your sister trip. She deserves this vacation. You are being incredibly selfish." Then Jasmine text came through. "We are boarding. Deal with it, or you are a terrible aunt. You have always been jealous of my beautiful mixed family. Stop making everything about you and just do your duty for once. Do your duty." That specific phrase was the story of my entire life. For 32 years, my role in this family was to be the invisible safety net. When Jasmine wanted to go to a private college, my parents drained my college fund to pay for it because she was the golden child, and I was just the quiet nerd who could figure it out on my own. When Caleb lost his first job, they expected me to co-sign a massive loan for them. I refused, and they did not speak to me for 6 full months. I was only ever useful when they needed something fixed, paid for, or managed. I looked down at Trey and Kayla. They were completely innocent. They did not deserve this kind of treatment. But I was completely done being the sacrificial lamb on the altar of Jasmine's overwhelming entitlement. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the rage bubbling in my chest. For years I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had smiled through Thanksgiving dinners while Caleb bragged about his fake promotions. I had bitten my tongue during Christmas, when my mother praised Jasmine domestic bliss while handing me gift cards to office supply stores. They truly believed I was weak because I chose silence over conflict. They mistook my boundaries for passivity. My cybersecurity firm handles threat assessment for major corporations. I deal with digital extortionists, hackers, and corporate espionage on a daily basis. Handling a pair of narcissistic relatives was not going to break me. I promised myself right then and there that I would never again allow my blood relatives to use my home as a dumping ground for their responsibilities. I put my phone securely in my pocket. "Come on, guys," I said gently, ushering them both into my house. "Grab your tablets. We are going for a ride." I grabbed my car keys and my heavy leather purse. I led the kids to the garage and strapped them into the back seat of my SUV. I pulled out of the garage, my jaw set tight. I was not calling my parents to argue. I was not fighting in a group chat. I was driving straight to the local police precinct to officially report 2 abandoned children. If Jasmine wanted to play dangerous games with her kids' safety, she could explain it to Child Protective Services. I navigated through the quiet, manicured streets of our upscale Atlanta suburb. The kids were quiet in the back, watching their screens, entirely unaware of the legal storm I was about to unleash on their parents. I turned onto the main avenue leading toward the precinct. I felt incredibly calm. For the first time in my entire life, the family guilt trip was not working. I was not folding under their pressure. I saw the large brick building of the police station approaching on the right. I signaled to turn into the parking lot. Just as I started to turn the steering wheel, a silver Lexus SUV shot out from a side street. It sped directly into my path, tires screeching loudly against the asphalt as it swerved horizontally, blocking the entrance to the precinct. I slammed on my brakes hard, my hands gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart jumped into my throat as my heavy vehicle jerked to a violent, shuddering halt just inches from the passenger side door of the Lexus. The 2 kids yelled out in the back seat, their tablets tumbling to the floorboards. I threw the car into park and unbuckled my seatbelt. The thick exhaust from her silver Lexus billowed into the warm Georgia air, creating a hazy cloud between our vehicles. I could see the furious rise and fall of her chest as she closed the distance. She did not care about the safety of her grandchildren sitting in my back seat. She only cared about protecting Jasmine. The driver's side door of the Lexus flew open immediately. High heels hit the pavement hard. My mother, Yvonne, marched directly toward my car. Her face was twisted with a deep fury I had not seen since I was a teenager. She marched right up to my driver's side window and slammed her fist against the glass. The real war had just begun right here in the parking lot. I pressed the button to roll down my window just enough to hear her. Yvonne did not waste a single second. She leaned down, her face practically pressed against the opening, her perfectly manicured fingernails gripping the edge of the glass. "Are you out of your mind, Chloe?" she screamed, her voice echoing across the empty pavement. "You turn this car around right now. You are not walking into that police station. You are not ruining your sister's life over a simple babysitting favor." I looked at her, my expression completely blank. "Leaving 2 young children on a porch without asking is not a babysitting favor, Mom," I said, keeping my tone even and measured. "It is child abandonment. I told them I was not doing it and they drove off anyway. That is a crime and I am reporting it." Yvonne let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "A crime," she repeated mockingly. "The only crime here is how jealous you have always been of your sister. You have always hated that she has a beautiful mixed family and a husband who provides for her. You sit in that big empty house alone behind your computer screens while she lives a real life. You should be honored they trusted you with their children." Her words were designed to hurt, to hit the insecurities I used to have in my 20s. But I was 32 now, and her manipulation tactics felt pathetic and outdated. "Mom, Caleb does not provide for anything," I said calmly. "He drives a leased car and wears suits he cannot afford. And Jasmine is just as broke as he is. They cannot even afford their own mortgage, let alone an 8-week vacation across Europe." Yvonne's face went completely pale. She stood up straight, her eyes darting away from mine. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "You do not know anything about their finances," she stammered. "They are doing very well. Caleb just closed a massive deal." I shook my head slowly, realizing exactly what was going on. "They did not close a deal," I said, piecing the puzzle together. "You gave them the money. You took out a second mortgage on your own home to pay for their fake luxury vacation, did not you?" Yvonne's silence was all the confirmation I needed. The guilt and shame washed over her features, but it was quickly replaced by defensive rage. She leaned back down to the window. "It is none of your business what I do with my money," she hissed. "I help my family. That is what families do. We support each other. Now turn this car around and take those kids home. I am not letting you call Child Protective Services on my daughter." I looked her dead in the eye. "Your poor financial choices are not my problem," I said. "And your obsession with protecting Jasmine at all costs ends today. I will give you exactly 24 hours to take these kids to your house. If you do not come get them by tomorrow morning, I am driving straight back to this precinct and I am making the report official." Before Yvonne could formulate another scream, a black Mercedes sedan pulled into the parking lot, stopping right behind my SUV. The driver door opened and my father Calvin stepped out. He wore his usual tailored golf polo and slacks, projecting the image of a calm, collected patriarch. But his jaw was set tight and his eyes were cold as he walked toward my car. "What is going on here?" Calvin demanded, looking between me and Yvonne. Yvonne immediately played the victim. "Calvin, she is trying to call the police on Jasmine," she cried out, gesturing wildly at my car. "She wants to ruin her sister over a simple misunderstanding." Calvin looked at me, his expression hardening into a glare. "Chloe, you need to stop this nonsense right now," he said, his voice carrying that deep authoritative tone he used to end arguments. "You are embarrassing this family. We do not involve the police in our private matters. You will take Trey and Kayla home, and you will care for them until your sister returns. That is the end of this discussion." I rested my hands on the steering wheel, looking at the man who had always put my sister's comfort above my basic dignity. "I am not doing it, Dad," I said clearly. "I just told Mom she has 24 hours to come get them. After that, it becomes a legal matter." Calvin stepped closer to my window, resting his heavy hands on the doorframe. "You listen to me very carefully, Chloe," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register. "If you walk into that building and ruin Jasmine's reputation, I will call the estate lawyer this afternoon. I will cut you out of the family trust entirely. You will not see a single dime of my money." For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of my car engine. Then I laughed. It was not a bitter laugh or an angry one. It was genuine amusement. My parents had spent their entire lives treating me like the quiet disappointment, the nerdy girl who fixed their routers and stayed out of the way. They truly believed their modest generational wealth was a leash they could use to control me. "Dad," I said, a wide smile spreading across my face, "I do not need your money. I have not needed your money since I was 22 years old. My company bills more in a single quarter than your entire trust is worth. You can leave every penny to Jasmine and Caleb for all I care. In fact, they are going to need it to pay off the second mortgage Mom just took out." Calvin's face contorted in shock. He looked at Yvonne, who immediately looked away, guilt written all over her face. I rolled my window up, cutting off whatever excuse Calvin was about to make. I put the car in reverse, maneuvered around Yvonne's silver Lexus, and drove out of the parking lot, leaving them both standing on the hot pavement. I drove back to my house, the adrenaline slowly fading into a cold, calculating focus. The kids were surprisingly quiet, clearly exhausted by the tension they had witnessed. When we got inside, I ordered them some pizza and set them up with a movie in the living room. I walked into my home office and sat at my large mahogany desk, pulling up my security feeds and network monitors. I needed to ensure my home was fully locked down. The day bled into evening, the house remaining eerily quiet. My parents did not show up to collect the children. The group chat remained completely silent. At 11 o'clock that night, I was sitting in my kitchen nursing a cup of tea when my phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a new text message. I picked it up expecting an apology or an excuse from my mother. Instead, the message was from Caleb. But it was not from an international number. There was no country code for Italy or France. The text originated from a local Atlanta area code. I stared at the bright screen, my blood running cold as I read the words. You think you are smart, Chloe. But you are about to learn what happens when you threaten my family. I am handling you tonight. The glowing letters on my phone screen felt like a physical threat burning into my eyes. Caleb was not in Europe. He was right here in Atlanta, hiding behind a local number and trying to intimidate me. A cold rush of adrenaline washed over my entire body, pushing away any lingering exhaustion from the day. I walked into the guest bedroom where Trey and Kayla were fast asleep on the large bed, their small chests rising and falling peacefully. I gently pulled the blankets up to their chins and quietly closed the bedroom door. I went straight to my home office and sat at my primary terminal. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, bringing my external security cameras online. I bypassed the standard residential alarm company and activated the proprietary defense system my firm had designed for high-risk targets. The perimeter motion sensors went hot. The thermal imaging cameras swept the front lawn and the dark woods behind my backyard. I turned off every light in the house, plunging the rooms into absolute pitch blackness. I kept my eyes locked on the thermal feeds, my heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm. Then at exactly 2 in the morning, the rear perimeter sensor flashed red on my screen. 2 thermal signatures appeared at the edge of my backyard, moving quickly and quietly through the trees toward my patio. I stood up from my desk, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. I did not call the police just yet. If Caleb wanted to play a dangerous game, I needed to secure the absolute advantage first. I walked swiftly down the hall toward the guest bedroom. Just as my hand touched the brass doorknob, a deafening crash shattered the silence of my home. The thick, reinforced glass of my back patio door caved in under the force of a heavy sledgehammer. The sound of splintering glass echoing through the dark kitchen made my blood run cold. They were inside. Heavy boots crunched over the broken glass. Trey and Kayla woke up instantly, their eyes wide with terror as the loud noises continued downstairs. Trey started to cry, asking what was happening. I did not have time to explain. I grabbed them both by their arms, pulling them out of the bed and rushing them across the hall to my master bedroom. I ushered the terrified children inside the small, brightly lit room. I knelt down, looking them right in the eyes, and promised them they were completely safe. I told them not to make a sound, and not to open the door for anyone but me. I pulled the heavy steel door shut and locked it securely behind them. With the kids safely secured, I turned back toward the dark hallway. My eyes had adjusted to the pitch-black house, but the intruders were using bright tactical flashlights, slicing beams of white light across my living room walls. I could hear their heavy breathing and the sound of them tearing through my cabinets. "Where is she?" One of them grunted, his voice muffled by a thick mask. "Find the kids!" The other one snapped back. He said she would be alone. They started moving toward the staircase. I stood at the top of the stairs, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tapped the screen of my smartwatch, bypassing the safety protocols on my home defense application. The 2 masked men reached the top of the stairs, sweeping their flashlights down the hallway. The bright beam caught me standing there in the dark. "There she is!" the taller man shouted, lunging forward. He closed the distance between us in seconds, his heavy boots pounding against the floorboards. I tried to step back, but the hallway was too narrow. He grabbed me by my shoulders, his thick fingers digging painfully into my skin, and slammed me hard against the drywall. The back of my head bounced against the plaster, sending a sharp burst of white-hot pain behind my eyes. "Where are the kids?" he yelled, shaking me violently. "Hand them over right now and nobody gets hurt." I tasted copper in my mouth where I had bitten my cheek during the impact. The second man stepped up beside him, holding a crowbar, and looking down at me with absolute contempt. I tapped the face of my smartwatch twice. Instantly, the proprietary acoustic defense system installed in the ceiling panels activated. A localized high-decibel siren ripped through the narrow hallway. It was a piercing, high-frequency sound wave designed to cause immediate physical disorientation and extreme vertigo. The sound was absolutely deafening, vibrating through my teeth and bones. Because I knew it was coming, I braced myself, but the 2 attackers were caught completely off guard. The man holding me immediately let go of my shoulders, screaming as he clutched his hands over his ears. He stumbled backward, his sense of balance completely destroyed by the acoustic frequency. The second man dropped his crowbar, it clattered loudly against the floorboards. He fell to his knees, grasping his head and groaning in agony. The piercing sound bounced off the narrow walls, amplifying the terrifying noise. I stepped past them, moving quickly toward the stairs. The taller man tried to grab my ankle blindly, but he was too disoriented to coordinate his movements. He thrashed wildly against the floor, trying to crawl away from the source of the punishing sound. In his blind panic, he reached into his jacket pocket, trying to pull out something. His hand jerked violently, and a small black burner phone slipped from his fingers, sliding across the smooth hardwood floor until it stopped right against the baseboard. He did not even notice he dropped it. The two men scrambled down the stairs, tripping over each other in their desperate attempt to escape the noise. They crashed through the living room, knocking over a side table and sprinting toward the shattered patio door. I quickly tapped my watch again, silencing the acoustic alarm. The sudden quiet ringing in my ears was almost as disorienting as the noise itself. Through the broken back door, I could hear the men crashing through the bushes in my backyard, scrambling over the wooden fence and disappearing into the dense Georgia woods. I leaned heavily against the wall, gasping for air, my entire body shaking with adrenaline. My shoulder throbbed where I had been slammed against the drywall, and blood trickled down my neck from a small cut near my hairline. I walked slowly down the hallway and knelt on the floor, picking up the small black burner phone the attacker had dropped. I turned it over in my hands. The screen was cracked, but the device was still fully functional. This was the exact mistake I was waiting for. This small piece of plastic was the key to dismantling everything my sister and her husband had built. I slipped the phone deep into my pocket, just as the piercing wail of police sirens echoed down my street. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated my living room through the front windows, casting erratic shadows across the walls. I reached the front door and unlocked the deadbolts, pulling the heavy door open. 3 Atlanta police officers were rushing up my walkway, their flashlights out and their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. "Step outside and keep your hands visible," the lead officer shouted, moving quickly up the porch steps. I stepped out into the cool night air, holding my empty hands up to show I was not a threat. "2 men broke in," I said, my voice trembling just enough to convey the trauma of the moment. "They smashed the back door. They were looking for my niece and nephew." The officers moved past me, sweeping into the house to clear the rooms. I stood on the porch, shivering slightly as the adrenaline began to crash. I touched my forehead, wincing as my fingers brushed against the sticky blood. I looked out toward the street, where several neighbors had stepped out onto their lawns, watching the commotion with wide eyes. Then a sleek black luxury sedan pulled up violently behind the parked police cruisers blocking the street. Caleb stepped out into the flashing police lights. He was not wearing his expensive European vacation clothes. He was wearing dark jeans and a black hoodie. He sprinted up my driveway, pushing past an officer who tried to stop him. A look of frantic terror painted perfectly across his face, playing the role of the desperate, heroic father rushing to save his children. "My kids!" he screamed, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "Where are my kids? What did this crazy woman do to my kids?" He pointed a trembling finger directly at me as he reached the porch. I stared at him, cold realization washing over me. He had orchestrated this entire violent nightmare just to set me up. I stared at him in absolute disbelief. The sheer audacity of this man spinning a dangerous web of lies right in front of my bleeding face left me momentarily speechless. The lead officer turned his flashlight away from Caleb and aimed the bright beam directly into my eyes. "What does he mean? What did you do to them?" the officer asked, his voice thick with sudden suspicion. I held my ground, keeping my posture straight despite the throbbing pain in my shoulder. "I own a corporate cybersecurity firm," I explained calmly. "I have high-level security protocols in my home because of the highly sensitive nature of my work. My brother-in-law is lying to you. He and my sister abandoned their children here 12 hours ago so they could go on a luxury vacation." Caleb jumped up from the porch floor, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "Do not listen to a single word she says," he yelled, his voice cracking with manufactured panic. "She is involved in illegal internet businesses. She deals on the dark web. Look at this house. Look at the reinforced steel doors and the acoustic weapons she just used. What normal person has a military-grade safe room hidden in a quiet suburban neighborhood? She deals with dangerous criminals, and she brought them right to my innocent children. She practically held them hostage today when we tried to pick them up. The three police officers exchanged wary glances. I could see the heavy doubt forming in their minds. To an ordinary patrol officer, my house did not look like a normal suburban residence. The biometric scanners, the reinforced steel door frames, the localized sonic disruptors I had just deployed against the intruders. It looked exactly like a paranoid fortress built by someone actively hiding from very dangerous people. The lead officer rested his hand on his radio, looking at me with a completely different expression now. His eyes were hard and judgmental. I opened my mouth to explain my corporate defense contracts when the screeching sound of two more vehicles pulling into my driveway cut me off. My mother Yvonne and my father Calvin slammed their car doors shut and ran across the front lawn, ignoring the police tape that was just being set up. My heart gave a sudden, desperate flutter of hope. My parents were here. Surely seeing my bruised face and the blood drying on my forehead would snap them out of their toxic obsession with Jasmine and Caleb. I took a step toward them, ready to finally be protected by my own family. But Yvonne did not even look at me. She ran straight past my bleeding face and threw her arms around Caleb. "Oh, thank God you are safe," Yvonne cried, hugging my attacker as if he were a victim. "Where are my precious grandchildren?" Calvin stopped in front of the lead police officer, projecting his usual authoritative calm. "Officer, my name is Calvin, and this is my daughter Chloe," he said, gesturing toward me with absolute disgust. "I am so sorry for the trouble she has caused tonight. She has been acting deeply erratic and hostile all day. I felt all the air leave my lungs. I stood on my own front porch surrounded by shattered glass and police officers, listening to my own parents throw me entirely to the wolves." "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You know they abandoned the kids today. You were there in the parking lot." Calvin did not even flinch. He looked me dead in the eye with zero remorse. "She has always been incredibly jealous of her sister. Beautiful family," Calvin told the police officer, completely ignoring my question. "She is single and lonely, and she has a history of making up elaborate lies to get attention. She was furious that her sister was going on a trip and she demanded to take the children. We tried to reason with her earlier today, but she became violent. Caleb must have rushed back to save them from her unstable behavior." Yvonne nodded vigorously, her hand still resting on Caleb's shoulder. "It is true," Officer Yvonne added, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We have been so worried about Chloe for months. She locks herself in this terrible fortress, staring at computer screens all day and dealing with very shady people. We begged Jasmine not to let the kids visit her, but Chloe insisted. She probably staged this entire break-in just to play the hero and prove she is a good aunt. She needs psychiatric help, not a police report." The betrayal was so profound, so completely absolute, that it felt like a physical knife twisting in my stomach. They were willing to watch me go to prison. They were willing to let a violent home invasion get swept under the rug just to protect Jasmine's reputation and cover up Caleb's financial lies. They were actively framing me to save the golden child. The lead officer nodded, pulling out his notepad. Emma, I am going to need you to step back from the door," he said to me, his tone completely devoid of the respect he had shown me 10 minutes earlier. "We are going to retrieve the children and hand them over to their father. We will also be bringing a detective out here to look into your security systems and your business practices. Do not leave the city." I did not argue. Arguing with police officers who had just been expertly manipulated by three wealthy-looking suburbanites would only make me look exactly as crazy as my family claimed I was. I simply nodded and stepped aside. Two officers walked into my house, and I gave them the passcode to unlock the safe room in my master bedroom. A few minutes later, they emerged carrying Trey and Kayla. The kids were crying and confused, holding tightly to the officers' hands. When Caleb saw them, he fell to his knees again, opening his arms wide. "Daddy is here," he sobbed, pulling the children into a tight embrace. "Daddy came back for you. I am never letting you out of my sight again." The police officers watched the emotional reunion with soft smiles, completely buying the heartwarming narrative. Yvonne and Calvin rushed over, kissing the children and wrapping their arms around Caleb, completing the picture-perfect image of a loving family surviving a terrible tragedy. The lead officer told Caleb he was free to take his children home and that they would be in touch regarding the investigation into my property. Caleb stood up, lifting Kayla into his arms while holding Trey's hand. Yvonne and Calvin walked ahead of him, leading the way to their cars. As Caleb walked past me down the porch steps, he paused for just a fraction of a second. He turned his head, leaning in close to my ear so the police officers could not hear him. "You should have just babysat," he whispered, his voice dripping with pure malicious triumph. "Now you lose everything." He walked away, stepping into the flashing red and blue police lights, and loaded the children into my parents' cars. I stood completely still on my porch, watching them drive away into the dark Atlanta night. The police officers stayed for another hour, taking photos of the shattered glass and asking me invasive questions about my computer servers. I answered them with polite, monotone professionalism, giving them absolutely nothing they could use against me. When the officers finally left, the silence of my ruined home was deafening. The cool night wind blew through the shattered frame of my back patio door, carrying the smell of pine needles and damp earth into my kitchen. I walked into the downstairs bathroom and flipped on the harsh fluorescent vanity light. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My suit jacket was torn at the shoulder. A nasty purple bruise was already forming along my collarbone. Dried blood crusted the side of my face, matting my hair against my temple. I turned on the faucet and ran a washcloth under the cold water. I slowly wiped the blood from my face, cleaning the wound with meticulous care. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a useless emotion designed for people who expected sympathy. I expected nothing from the world, and absolutely nothing from my blood relatives. The sadness I had felt on the porch was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating precision. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully framed the quiet computer nerd and walked away without a single consequence. I dried my face with a towel and tossed it onto the counter. I walked out of the bathroom and made my way down the dark hallway, stepping carefully over the broken glass. I walked past the living room and stopped at a solid oak bookshelf built into the wall. I pressed my thumb against a hidden biometric scanner located under the third shelf. The heavy bookshelf clicked and swung open smoothly, revealing a climate-controlled server room glowing with soft blue LED lights. I stepped inside the freezing room and let the heavy hidden door lock shut behind me. I sat down in the ergonomic leather chair in front of my primary forensic terminal. I reached deep into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out the small black burner phone the masked attacker had dropped during the acoustic alarm. I placed the cracked plastic device on my desk. My family thought my business was just fixing internet connections. They did not know I spent my days destroying digital ghosts. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a specialized data extraction cable. I plugged one end into my isolated offline forensic network server and connected the other end directly into the charging port of the burner phone. I cracked my knuckles staring at the command prompt blinking on my massive monitor. I took a slow, deep breath and typed in the execution code. I pressed the Enter key and hit Decrypt. The screen immediately flooded with lines of complex green code as my proprietary software bypassed the cheap encryption protocols of the burner phone. A progress bar appeared tracking the data extraction process. I sat back in my chair watching the percentages climb higher and higher. Every deleted text message, every encrypted call log, every location ping was being systematically ripped from the memory drive of the device and copied onto my secure server. Caleb thought he was a mastermind because he hired 2 street thugs with a hammer. He had no concept of the digital warfare I was about to wage against him. As the decryption process neared completion, I opened a secondary terminal and began running automated background searches on Caleb and Jasmine. I initiated deep-dive financial algorithms that my firm normally used to vet corporate executives for our billionaire clients. I wanted to see every single bank account, every credit card statement, every loan application, and every shell company they had ever registered. If they were desperate enough to stage a violent home invasion and risk the lives of their own children, They were hiding something massive. The terminal beeped loudly, signaling the extraction was complete. The extracted files populated on my left monitor, categorized neatly into text logs, image files, and banking applications. I hovered my mouse over the folder labeled Deleted Communications. My shoulder ached, my head throbbed, and my heart was locked behind a wall of pure ice. I clicked the folder open, ready to dissect every single lie my family had ever told. I was going to tear their entire fake luxury life apart piece by digital piece. The first file I opened contained the deleted text message logs from the burner phone. I leaned closer to the monitor as the raw data translated into readable text strings on my screen. Caleb had not been particularly clever about hiding his tracks. He used a cheap encrypted messaging application that my software dismantled in less than 3 seconds. I scrolled through the chronological list of messages starting from early yesterday morning. The very first text from Caleb read, "I need a house cleared and the owner terrified, but the kids must be locked away first." The recipient replied asking for the address and the payout. Caleb sent my exact home address and promised $10,000 in untraceable cryptocurrency. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach as I read the casual way my brother-in-law arranged for my physical assault. He had negotiated the price of my safety while sitting at his kitchen table. I bypassed the security pin and accessed the transaction history. 2 distinct transfers of cryptocurrency were sent from an account linked to Caleb. The first transfer acted as a down payment sent just minutes before Jasmine dumped the kids on my front porch. The second transfer was scheduled to execute upon confirmation of the break-in. He had planned this entire ordeal long before they arrived. Staging a home invasion is an extreme measure even for Caleb. People do not hire masked men to smash glass doors simply to avoid babysitting duties. There had to be a larger incentive driving his desperation. I closed the local files and shifted my attention to the global financial algorithms running on my servers. I began scraping public records, bank registries, and federal databases for any information connected to Caleb and Jasmine. An anomaly appeared on my screen moments later. It was a credit card charge registered to Jasmine. The charge was processed at an exclusive luxury hotel right here in downtown Atlanta. The transaction occurred only 4 hours ago, which meant my sister was not on a romantic European getaway. She was hiding less than 20 miles away, ordering expensive room service, while her children were terrified in police custody. A secondary trace confirmed. Both of their cell phones were currently pinging off the wireless router in the penthouse suite. Finding their location was satisfying, but it did not explain their panic. I expanded my search parameters, instructing my software to bypass standard financial firewalls and pull sealed legal filings from the federal district court system. A massive encrypted document downloaded onto my desktop. I opened the file and began reading through the dense legal terminology. The truth of their fake luxury life hit me like a physical blow. Caleb and Jasmine were absolutely ruined. The document was a sealed federal indictment for wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. Federal prosecutors claimed Caleb had been systematically siphoning money from his investors to fund his lavish lifestyle. He bought luxury cars, designer clothes, and expensive vacations using stolen funds. Jasmine was listed as a co-conspirator because she had knowingly funneled the stolen money through her own fake consulting businesses to wash the cash. They were drowning in over $4 million of defaulted debt, and the federal government was preparing to seize every single asset they possessed. I sat back processing the magnitude of their lies. My mother had taken out a second mortgage on her house to pay for a vacation that never existed. She had handed her money to a pair of desperate criminals, actively fleeing federal authorities. But even that massive revelation did not fully explain why they needed to drop the kids at my house and stage a violent break-in. I stared at the ceiling, putting the pieces together one by one. If Caleb and Jasmine were about to lose everything they needed, a massive influx of untraceable cash immediately. They needed a golden parachute to pay off their angry investors before the indictments went public. I opened a new search window and queried the estate records for Caleb's side of the family. Caleb came from a wealthy background, but his parents had cut him off financially years ago. However, his grandparents had set up a very specific generational wealth vehicle before they passed away. I found the trust documents filed in the county archives. It was a massive financial trust fund designated exclusively for their children. Trey and Kayla were the sole beneficiaries of a trust currently valued at nearly $8 million. The stipulations of the trust were incredibly strict. The parents could not access the principal balance unless there was a documented catastrophic emergency threatening the immediate welfare of the children. If the children were placed in imminent mortal danger, the family court could authorize an emergency release of trust funds to relocate and protect the minors. The entire twisted scheme suddenly made perfect sense. The realization made me feel physically sick. Caleb and Jasmine dumped their children at my house knowing I would refuse to take them. They wanted me to look uncooperative and hostile. Then Caleb hired criminals to shatter my door and assault me in the dark. He planned to rush in right behind the police, playing the protective father saving his kids from an unstable aunt. He needed the police to write a formal report stating that my house was a highly dangerous environment and that the children had survived a violent incident. With that official police report, Caleb and Jasmine could march directly into family court on Monday morning. They would present the report to a judge, claim the children were in grave danger, and demand an emergency dissolution of the trust fund to immediately relocate their family to safety. They were going to steal $8 million from their own children to pay off wire fraud debts and escape federal prison. They were willing to traumatize Trey and Kayla and send me to jail just to maintain their fake wealthy lifestyle. The sheer entitlement and absolute moral bankruptcy of my sister and her husband left me breathless. They used my mother to fund their hotel stay, they used the police as pawns, and they used me as the scapegoat to unlock a fortune. I looked at the dark monitor, seeing my own reflection in the smooth glass. They thought they had backed me into a corner, but they had no idea they had just handed me the keys to their complete destruction. I opened my primary financial terminal and began tracking the specific debts Caleb owed to his defrauded investors. If he was desperate enough to stage a home invasion for emergency cash, his creditors were closing in fast. I pulled up the commercial loan registries and scanned his defaulted business accounts. He had borrowed heavily against his fake company, using high-interest commercial loans that he had not paid in over a year. The largest loan totaled just over $3 million. According to banking records, Caleb completely defaulted on this specific loan last month. Because the original lenders believed the debt was unrecoverable, they bundled it and sold it to a secondary debt collection market. I followed the digital paper trail, watching the debt move from a commercial bank to a private collection agency and finally to a private equity firm that specialized in acquiring distressed high-value assets. I leaned closer to my monitor, scanning the corporate registration details of the private equity firm that now legally owned Caleb's massive defaulted loan. A slow, cold smile spread across my face as I read the names of the board of directors. The private equity firm was a subsidiary holding company based in downtown Atlanta. It bought up toxic debt from desperate executives and foreclosed on their assets without mercy. I recognized the company structure immediately because I designed it myself 3 years ago. The private equity firm that now held the absolute legal power to destroy Caleb was entirely controlled by a parent corporation. That parent corporation was an anonymous limited liability company registered in Delaware, and my own primary business account held the majority voting rights for that exact company. Caleb thought he had outsmarted me by sending thugs to my house to build a fake legal case. I thought he was untouchable because my parents supported his lies. He did not realize that by defaulting on his loans, he had unknowingly sold his entire financial existence directly to me. I was not just his sister-in-law anymore. I was currently the absolute legal owner of his largest, most dangerous debt. I held the power to freeze his bank accounts, seize his luxury cars, and legally foreclose on his mansion before the sun even came up. I cracked my knuckles and prepared to take everything he had to teach them a final, painful lesson. They would soon learn that treating me like a disposable asset was the worst mistake they could have ever made in their miserable lives. I reached for my phone on the smooth mahogany desk and dialed Malik. It was well past 3 in the morning, but I knew he would be awake. Malik was not just my business partner, He was a relentless financial strategist who thrived on destroying corporate parasites. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert. I told him we needed to execute an immediate hostile acquisition of a specific distressed commercial debt portfolio. I sent him the encrypted file containing the commercial loan registry and the private equity holding details. I heard him typing rapidly on his end of the line as he pulled up the financial data. When he saw whose name was attached to the defaulted $3 million commercial loan, he let out a low whistle of surprise. I explained the entire situation to him in plain, objective terms. I told him about the shattered glass, the masked men, the gullible police officers, and Caleb standing on my porch, playing the innocent victim. Malik did not ask any unnecessary questions or express useless sympathy. He simply asked for my formal authorization to bypass standard operating procedures and use our emergency reserve capital to buy the debt outright before regular business hours began. I gave him the absolute green light. For the next 2 hours, we sat on an open phone line coordinating the complex digital paperwork. We routed the aggressive acquisition through 3 different anonymous shell companies to mask my identity until the final transfer was completely finalized. By the time the morning sun began to rise over the Atlanta skyline, casting a warm orange glow through my office windows, the transaction had successfully cleared the international banking protocols. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and watched the official legal confirmation populate on my bright computer screen. I was now legally the absolute owner of Caleb and his entire fraudulent existence. He owed me $3.2 million payable immediately upon demand due to his long-standing default status. I pulled up the itemized collateral attached to his commercial loan. Caleb had leveraged absolutely everything he had to secure that initial money. He had put up his sprawling 6-bedroom mansion in Alpharetta as collateral. He had leveraged the titles to his 2 imported luxury cars. He had even put up the remaining equity in his failing consulting business. He had signed away his entire life to maintain the elaborate illusion of extreme wealth. And now I held the powerful leash. I had the legal authority to freeze his bank accounts, seize his vehicles, and foreclose on his massive home with a single phone call to my corporate attorneys. The same arrogant man who stood on my porch and told me I had no life was now entirely dependent on my mercy. And I had absolutely zero mercy left to give. I printed the official ownership documents and placed them neatly into a black leather folder on my desk to present to him later. This was the ultimate leverage I needed to dismantle his ego entirely. I wanted to see the exact moment the realization hit his arrogant face. I wanted him to understand that the quiet sister-in-law he had mocked and belittled for years was the one pulling the strings of his financial ruin. As I was reviewing the final foreclosure documents, my phone buzzed loudly on the desk with a social media notification. Jasmine had just gone live on her primary account. I clicked the notification and mirrored the video feed directly to my large monitor so I could see every detail. My sister filled the screen looking perfectly disheveled. She was wearing a plush white bathrobe, and her makeup was carefully smudged to make it look like she had been crying for several hours. Behind her was a beautiful romantic view of the Eiffel Tower glowing in the evening light. But I recognized the lighting mismatch immediately. It was a digital green screen background. She was sitting in a luxury hotel room right here in Atlanta, pretending to broadcast live from Paris. She looked directly into the camera lens and let out a dramatic, heartbreaking sob. "I need to share something terrible with you guys," she said, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. Caleb and I had to rush back from our European anniversary trip because of a massive family emergency. My sister Chloe had a complete mental breakdown. She forced us to leave our children with her, and then she put them in extreme danger. She started crying harder, weaving a completely fabricated story about how she received a terrifying phone call and had to fly back across the ocean to save her babies from my dangerous house. She claimed I was involved in shady, illegal internet activities and that I had brought violent criminals right to my innocent niece and nephew. She thanked her brave, heroic husband Caleb for rushing into my house and saving their children from my severe negligence. She begged her followers to pray for her family during this difficult time and promised she would protect her children from my toxic influence. The comments on her live stream were flooding in with sympathy and prayers from her thousands of loyal followers. They were calling her a brave hero and calling me a dangerous monster. She was using her platform to paint me as a villain while hiding from federal indictments. The absolute audacity of her lies made my blood run cold. She was weaponizing her audience to validate the fake police report Caleb had just filed. The live stream had only been up for 10 minutes, but the toxic fallout was immediate. My personal cell phone began vibrating non-stop against the wooden desk. The family group chat exploded with hateful messages. My Aunt Linda sent a long paragraph calling me a total disgrace to the family name and demanding I apologize to Jasmine. My cousin Anthony texted me saying I was a sick and jealous person who needed to be locked up in a secure psychiatric ward. My Uncle David left a furious voicemail threatening to come to my house and teach me a painful lesson for putting his great-niece and nephew in mortal danger. My cousin Sarah sent a string of angry emojis telling me I was dead to the entire family. They were all buying into Jasmine fake tears without a single moment of hesitation. They did not care to ask for my side of the story because it was always easier to believe I was the problem. They had spent decades casting me as the bitter, lonely sister, so this dramatic narrative fit perfectly into their prejudiced worldview. I turned my phone on silent and tossed it onto the desk. Their hateful words meant absolutely nothing to me anymore. I was no longer seeking their approval or their conditional love. I closed the social media window and opened a highly secured application on my desktop. The police officers who searched my house earlier only saw the standard security cameras mounted by the front door. They did not know I had concealed military-grade infrared cameras installed discreetly along the roofline of my house. These specialized cameras captured high-resolution video in complete darkness using advanced thermal and infrared technology. I selected the camera angle pointing toward the dark woods behind my backyard and rewound the recorded footage to exactly 1 hour before the patio glass shattered. I watched the black and white infrared feed intently. A clear human figure emerged from the thick tree line. The facial recognition software enhanced the image, instantly revealing Caleb walking cautiously through the darkness. He was standing right outside my back window, looking around nervously to ensure no one was watching him. 2 more figures stepped out of the woods to meet him. They were the masked men who had broken into my home. I watched in crystal clear 4K resolution as Caleb pulled a thick envelope of cash from his dark jacket pocket and handed it directly to the taller man. Caleb then pointed explicitly at my back patio door, giving them clear visual directions on how to enter my property. The high-sensitivity audio sensors picked up his voice perfectly. He told them to break the glass and scare me, but to make absolutely sure the children were locked away safely before they did anything violent. He specifically instructed them to make the house look like it had been targeted by professional criminals so the police would suspect my business practices. I exported the video file and saved it to an encrypted hard drive. I had the financial documents proving his federal fraud. I had the decrypted text messages from the burner phone confirming the digital transaction. And now I had irrefutable high-definition video evidence of him paying criminals to attack me in my own home. I was truly ready to destroy her reality tonight. I was still staring at the frozen infrared frame when my phone began vibrating against the desk. My mother's name filled the screen. For 1 second I considered letting it ring until it stopped, but then I remembered what Caleb needed more than anything: my cooperation. If they believed I was frightened, they would keep talking. I answered and said nothing. Yvonne did not ask whether I was hurt. She did not ask whether the police had found the men who broke into my house. Her first words were, "Chloe, we need to fix what you did before this gets any worse." Her voice was softer than it had been in the police parking lot, but the softness was artificial. I knew that tone. It was the voice she used when she wanted obedience without another public scene. I leaned back in my chair and let a small tremor enter my breathing. "Fix what I did?" I asked quietly. She released a long sigh, as if I were an exhausting child. "Jasmine is devastated. Caleb is barely holding himself together. The children are traumatized. Your behavior today created all of this. We are willing to forgive you, but only if you stop fighting the family and take responsibility before the police turn this into something permanent." I looked at the infrared image on my monitor. Caleb was frozen in perfect black and white clarity with an envelope extended toward one of the masked men. My mother was asking me to confess to a crime, while evidence of the real criminal glowed 3 feet in front of me. "What exactly do you want me to do?" I asked. Her answer came too quickly. That told me they had already rehearsed it. She said I needed to sign a written statement, admitting I had overreacted when Jasmine left the children with me, that I had created an unsafe environment because of my business, and that the confrontation with Caleb had been caused by my unstable behavior. She wanted me to state that Caleb had come to my house only because he was worried about his children. Then she added that I needed to compensate Jasmine and Caleb for the emotional damage the interrupted vacation and the legal expenses they claimed I had caused. I almost laughed, but I forced myself to sound small. "How much?" There was a brief silence. Then Yvonne said, "Caleb thinks $100,000 is fair. If you cooperate, he is willing to tell the police this was a family misunderstanding and not push the complaint any further." There it was. Not just gaslighting. Extortion wrapped in the language of family peace. I lowered my voice another degree. "Mom, I do not want to go to jail." The change in her breathing was immediate. She thought she had me. I could practically hear her shoulders relax through the phone. "Then stop being stubborn," she said. "We can handle this privately." Caleb arranged a family mediation dinner tonight in Buckhead. Just the 5 of us. You sign the confession, sign the confidentiality agreement, pay what you owe, and we all move forward. No more police. No more embarrassing Jasmine. No more attacks on this family. I let several seconds pass before answering. The pause was deliberate. I wanted her to imagine me sitting alone in my broken house, bruised and terrified, finally defeated by the pressure they had applied all day. "Fine," I whispered. "Tell them I will come." Yvonne's voice changed completely. The sympathy disappeared, and authority returned. 8 o'clock. "Do not bring one of your computer people. Do not bring a lawyer. This is family business, Chloe. Come alone and be reasonable for once in your life." I stared at Caleb's face on the infrared frame. "I will be there," I said. She hung up without saying goodbye. For the first time since the break-in, I smiled. They had just given me exactly what I needed. A time, a place, and a room where every person who had participated in framing me would be sitting together. More importantly, Yvonne had confirmed the financial demand and the confession plan in her own words. My call recorder had captured every second. I exported the audio, timestamped it, and saved it beside the burner phone logs and the infrared footage. Less than 10 minutes later, a new email notification appeared on my secure phone. The sender was a small Atlanta law office I did not recognize. The subject line read, "Formal mediation demand and notice of claim." I opened the attachment and felt my eyebrows rise at the sheer arrogance of it. The document ordered me to appear at the Buckhead restaurant at 8 that evening for a private family mediation. It accused me of negligence, emotional abuse, unlawful interference with parental rights, and damage to Caleb and Jasmine's reputation. Attached behind it was a demand for $100,000 in so-called emotional distress and legal costs. A second document required me to admit that my security systems and unstable conduct had endangered the children. A third was a broad non-disclosure agreement designed to prevent me from discussing the home invasion, the fake European vacation, the police report, or the family's financial situation with anyone. The final paragraph was the most revealing. If I signed everything and paid the money, Caleb would agree not to pursue additional allegations arising from the incident at my home. In other words, he had put the threat in writing. He believed I was frightened enough to pay him to stop weaponizing the lie he had created. I downloaded the entire package and stored 3 encrypted copies. One went to my isolated evidence server. One went into a protected cloud vault controlled by my firm. The third I forwarded to Malik with a short message. They scheduled the execution themselves. 8 tonight. His reply appeared less than a minute later. "Good. We make sure it is theirs." I placed my phone beside the keyboard and looked around the hidden server room. A few hours earlier, my family had treated me like a disposable babysitter. Then they tried to make me look unstable. Then Caleb sent men into my home and used my parents to reinforce the lie. Now they wanted me to walk into a private room, sign away the truth, and hand them $100,000 for the privilege. They still believed pressure would make me surrender. They had never understood that pressure was the environment in which I did my best work. I opened a new evidence folder and labeled it Buckhead. Into it I placed Yvonne's recorded call, Caleb's threat, the mediation demand, the burner phone extraction, the financial records, and the infrared video. Then I closed every unrelated window on my monitors. The emotional part of this war was over. From that moment forward, everything would be documented, timed, and deliberate. I sat back in my leather chair and stared at the digital confirmation on my screen. The financial trap was fully set and armed. Caleb thought he was bringing a knife to a gunfight, but I had just bought the entire battlefield. I opened the encrypted folder containing the high-definition infrared video and the translated burner phone text messages. I transferred the pristine files directly onto a sleek silver tablet. I wanted the screen to be large and the audio to be crystal clear when I dropped the device onto the restaurant table tonight. I locked the device safely. I slid the locked tablet into my designer leather briefcase. I pulled up the commercial loan foreclosure documents from the legal portal. The heavy printer in the corner of my office hummed to life, spitting out page after page of undeniable legal destruction. I gathered the warm pages, stacking them perfectly, and placed them into a thick manila envelope. I sealed the envelope and placed it right next to the tablet. I was bringing the absolute end of my sister and her husband in a single sleek bag. My desk phone buzzed silently with a single notification from Malik entirely. I grabbed my briefcase and walked out of my hidden server room, locking the heavy bookshelf behind me. I drove my dark gray vehicle straight to a secluded coffee shop on the edge of downtown Atlanta. Malik was already sitting at a corner table, nursing a black coffee. Sitting across from him was Detective Jackson, a veteran investigator with the Atlanta Police Department, who routinely handled high-profile corporate fraud cases for our clients. Jackson knew me well, and he respected my firm immensely. I slid into the wooden chair next to Malik and placed a small encrypted drive down. The detective looked at the hard drive and then looked at me, his expression completely serious. I explained every single detail of the home invasion to him. I told him how Caleb hired 2 local thugs to shatter my door and terrorize my niece and nephew just to manipulate the family court system. I explained the federal wire fraud indictment and how Caleb needed a fake police report to steal $8 million from his own children. Detective Jackson clenched his jaw tight as he listened to the sheer audacity of Caleb manipulating the patrol officers last night without hesitation. Filing a false police report while orchestrating a violent home invasion is a massive felony, Jackson said, his voice low and hard. I slid the hard drive across the table, telling him it contained the infrared video of Caleb paying the attackers, along with the decrypted text logs coordinating the assault. I also told him I included the financial documents proving Caleb was currently fleeing federal prosecution. Jackson picked up the drive and put it securely into his jacket pocket. He told me he was going to fast-track the arrest warrant the moment he verified the footage completely soon. We coordinated the exact timing of the trap. I told him the family mediation dinner was scheduled for 8 tonight at a highly exclusive restaurant in Buckhead. Jackson promised he would be standing by with a strike team ready to walk through the doors the second I gave Malik the signal. We shook hands and I left the coffee shop feeling an intense wave of cold anticipation. I drove back to my house to prepare for the final execution of my plan. My family had spent the last 32 years treating me like an invisible, pathetic computer nerd always. They expected me to show up to this dinner looking defeated, exhausted, and wearing some frumpy sweater. They expected me to cower under their collective judgment and beg for their forgiveness. I walked into my master bedroom and opened my expansive walk-in closet. I bypassed the casual clothes I usually wore to avoid drawing their critical attention. Instead, I pulled out a custom-tailored designer suit I had purchased in Milan during a corporate security conference. The suit was a deep midnight blue spun from flawless Italian silk. It hugged my shoulders perfectly, projecting quiet, lethal power everywhere gracefully. I paired the suit with a crisp white silk blouse and sleek black stilettos. I sat at my vanity and styled my hair in a sharp, elegant press, pulling it away from my face to highlight my cheekbones. I applied my makeup with meticulous precision, creating a flawless, powerful look that commanded absolute respect. I looked at my reflection in the tall mirror. The bruised cut on my forehead was carefully concealed by the makeup, but the fierce determination in my eyes could not be hidden. I did not look like the quiet sacrificial lamb of the family anymore ever. I looked like a woman who owned corporate debt and destroyed financial empires before lunch. I grabbed my leather briefcase and walked out of my house, locking the damaged doors behind me. The drive to Buckhead took exactly 40 minutes. The evening traffic was heavy, but I felt completely relaxed listening to the steady hum of my engine. I pulled into the valet circle of the upscale restaurant. The building was wrapped in glass and polished stone, projecting the exact kind of fake luxury my sister and her husband worshipped. I handed my keys to the waiting valet attendant smoothly. I walked through the heavy glass doors, feeling the cool air conditioning wash over me. The low murmur of wealthy patrons and the clinking of crystal glasses filled the elegant dining room. The hostess stood behind a marble podium, looking at me with a polite, welcoming smile. I gave her my last name, and she immediately nodded. She grabbed a leather-bound menu and led me away from the main dining floor. We walked down a quiet corridor, lined with expensive modern art and soft ambient lighting. She stopped in front of a heavy wooden door with frosted glass panels. This was the private dining room. This was exactly where Caleb wanted to spring his trap. He wanted to force me into a corner away from public eyes so my parents could bully me into signing a confession and handing over my money. The hostess opened the door and stepped aside, allowing me to enter the room. I walked in my heels, clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. The room was beautiful, featuring a long mahogany table set with fine china and silverware. A massive chandelier cast a warm golden light over the people sitting at the table. Jasmine, Caleb, Yvonne, and Calvin were already seated. They had ordered expensive champagne and were casually sipping their drinks, acting like they were celebrating a massive victory. When they heard my heels click against the floor, all four of them turned their heads to look at me. The smug, triumphant smiles on their faces faltered for just a fraction of a second as they took in my appearance. They expected a broken, weeping victim, but I walked in looking like the owner of the entire establishment. Caleb recovered quickly, puffing his chest out and leaning back in his velvet chair. I wore a sharp gray suit, projecting his usual arrogant confidence. Jasmine sat right beside him, adjusting a diamond necklace she probably bought with stolen investor funds. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. Yvonne and Calvin sat across from them, looking stern and judgmental, ready to play their roles as the disappointed, righteous parents. They thought they held all the power in this room. They thought I was walking into their perfectly orchestrated slaughterhouse. I looked at the four people who had betrayed me, abandoned me, and tried to destroy my life without a single ounce of regret. I did not feel a single drop of sadness or fear. I felt absolutely nothing but the cold, thrilling anticipation of dropping the guillotine on their miserable lives. I walked slowly toward the empty seat waiting for me. Every step I took felt like a countdown to their absolute destruction. My mother Yvonne refused to make eye contact with me, choosing instead to stare at her crystal champagne flute. My father Calvin crossed his arms over his chest, trying to look imposing and authoritative. They were pathetic enablers who had sold their souls to protect a highly toxic golden child. Caleb tapped his fingers against the polished wood table, an arrogant smirk playing on his lips. He really believed he had beaten me. He really believed he was walking out of this restaurant with emergency custody of the children and a cleared path to $8 million. He had no idea that federal prison was waiting for him just on the other side of those frosted glass doors. I pulled out the heavy wooden chair at the head of the table, placed my leather briefcase on the floor, and sat down quietly to end this war once and for all. The heavy wooden chair groaned slightly against the polished floor as I settle into it. I keep my posture perfectly straight, resting my hands lightly on the cool mahogany surface of the table. The private dining room is suffocatingly quiet. The only sound is the soft hum of the central air conditioning and the faint clinking of ice against crystal as Jasmine takes a long, deliberate sip of her expensive champagne. They are all staring at me, waiting for the inevitable breakdown they are so accustomed to witnessing. In their minds, I am still the terrified little girl who used to hide in her bedroom while they tore apart my self-esteem. But the woman sitting across from them tonight is entirely unrecognizable to them. Caleb does not waste a single second. He wants to establish complete dominance right out of the gate. He straightens the lapels of his gray suit and reaches into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulls out a thick manila envelope and tosses it onto the center of the table. His movements are aggressive and theatrical, designed to intimidate me. He slides his hand over the envelope, pushing it roughly across the smooth wood until it stops just inches from my folded hands. I do not flinch. I do not even look down at the envelope. I keep my eyes locked directly on his. "Go ahead and open it, Chloe," he says, his voice dripping with condescension and fake authority. It is everything we need to put this ugly little incident behind us and move forward. I slowly reach out and flip open the metal clasp of the envelope. I slide out 2 thick stacks of legal paper printed on heavy stock. The first document is a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. It stipulates that I will never discuss the events of the home invasion, the police report, or their fake European vacation with anyone ever again. The second document is a formal legal demand letter, drafted by some cut-rate attorney Caleb probably found online. The letter explicitly demands that I pay Caleb and Jasmine $100,000 in emotional distress damages. It claims my negligent security practices and erratic behavior caused them severe psychological trauma and forced them to abandon a costly international trip. The sheer audacity of the demand is almost poetic. He hired violent criminals to smash my glass doors, and now he wants me to pay him for the privilege of being terrorized. I leave the documents resting on the table and look up at my sister. Jasmine sets her champagne flute down, the delicate crystal making a sharp ping against the wood. She leans forward, resting her elbows on the table, her diamond rings catching the light from the chandelier overhead. "You brought this entirely on yourself, Chloe," she says, her tone dripping with venomous satisfaction. "You have always been so incredibly bitter. You sit in that heavily fortified house all by yourself, nursing your sad, lonely little life and plotting ways to ruin my happiness. This is exactly what happens when you try to destroy a perfect family out of pure jealousy. You thought you could keep my children hostage and manipulate the situation to make me look like a bad mother. But Caleb stepped up. He saved our kids from your toxic environment." She pauses to reach out and grab Caleb by the hand, gazing at him like he is some kind of conquering hero. "You tried to ruin my marriage-saving vacation, and instead you proved to the entire world that you are completely unfit to be around my children. We had to rush all the way back from Europe because of your insanity. You should be down on your knees thanking us for giving you a way out of this mess without sending you to a federal penitentiary." Her delusions are so deeply ingrained that she actually believes her own fabricated reality. She truly thinks she is the victim of my imaginary jealousy. She has spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself, and now she thinks she has finally delivered the fatal blow. My mother, Yvonne, leans forward next. She reaches across the wide table, her gold bracelets clinking together, and gently taps her manicured index finger against the signature line of the non-disclosure agreement. "Chloe, listen to your sister," Yvonne says, her voice adopting that fake soothing tone she always uses when she is trying to manipulate me into submission. "We are a family, and families forgive each other. We are willing to look past your erratic behavior and your dangerous lifestyle. We are willing to sweep this whole terrible nightmare under the rug for the sake of family unity. Just sign the papers, sweetheart. Pay the settlement money, so Caleb can get the children the intensive trauma therapy they need after what you put them through." Yvonne looks around the table, seeking validation from the others, before turning her sharp eyes back to me. "If you just sign the contract right now, we will call the police precinct and tell them we decline to press formal charges against you. We will save you from going to jail. You can go back to your quiet little computers, and we can all move on with our lives. It is the best deal you are ever going to get." Her ability to lie with a straight face is staggering. She knows Caleb staged the break-in. She knows he filed a false police report, yet she is sitting here actively participating in the extortion of her own daughter to protect a son-in-law who is currently fleeing federal prosecution. My father, Calvin, decides it is time to deliver the final blow. He sits up straight, expanding his broad chest and fixing me with a stern, judgmental glare. "Do not make this harder than it has to be. Chloe Calvin commands, his deep voice echoing in the private dining room. You made a massive mistake. You let your petty jealousy cloud your judgment, and you put your niece and nephew in harm's way. Now it is time to take your punishment like an adult. You will sign those documents. You will transfer the funds to Caleb's account by tomorrow morning. And then you will issue a formal apology to your sister for trying to ruin her reputation. Calvin leans closer, his expression hardening into absolute authority. If you refuse to do exactly as I say, I will personally ensure the estate lawyers finalize your removal from the family trust before the weekend is over. You will be entirely cut off. No more second chances, no more safety nets. You either sign the paper or you walk out of this restaurant as a complete stranger to this family forever. He delivers the threat with absolute certainty. Hy truly believes the trust fund is the ultimate weapon because it has always worked to control Jasmine. He assumes the threat of losing my inheritance will bring me to my knees begging for their mercy. I sit in absolute silence, letting his heavy words hang in the cool air of the room. I do not raise my voice to argue. I do not let a single tear form in my eyes. I do not show them a fraction of the emotional breakdown they are so desperately waiting to see. I keep my breathing slow and measured, projecting an aura of complete and utter tranquility. I slowly reach into the inner pocket of my tailored silk blazer. My fingers wrap around the cool metal barrel of a sleek black designer pen. I pull the pen out and hold it up slightly so the light catches the silver trim. Caleb leans back in his velvet chair, a massive smug smirk spreading across his arrogant face. He looks at Jasmine and gives her a subtle triumphant nod. He really thinks he has won. He thinks his cheap intimidation tactics and my parents' enabling behavior have successfully forced me into submission. I lower the pen and hover the fine ink tip directly over the signature line on the final page of the non-disclosure agreement. I pause for 3 long seconds, letting the anticipation build in the room. I can actually hear Yvonne let out a quiet sigh of relief, thinking the family scandal has been successfully buried. They are already imagining how they will spend my $100,000. Instead of pressing the ink to the paper, I smoothly snap the silver cap back onto the pen. I place the pen down and deliberately push the thick stack of extortion documents straight back across the mahogany table. The papers slide smoothly, stopping right in front of Caleb. His smug smirk instantly vanishes, replaced by a dark, confused scowl. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" Caleb demands, his voice dropping its fake polite tone. "You sign that paper right now or I am calling the detective back to my house." Before anyone else can speak, I reach down into my leather briefcase resting on the floor. I pull out my sleek silver iPad. I place the device dead center on the mahogany table, ensuring the high-resolution screen is perfectly visible to every single person sitting in the room. I look directly into Caleb's eyes, my own gaze as cold as liquid nitrogen. "I do not negotiate with criminals, Caleb," I say, my voice ringing with absolute lethal clarity. I reach forward and firmly hit the play button on the screen. The high-resolution screen illuminates the dim, private dining room with a sharp white glow. The crystal-clear 4K infrared video begins to play immediately. There is no static and no grainy distortion. The specialized cameras mounted on the edge of my roofline captured everything in absolute perfect detail. The video shows the dark woods behind my backyard. Then a figure steps into the frame. It is Caleb. He is wearing a dark hoodie, but the infrared technology highlights his facial features with undeniable clarity. The ambient noise of the restaurant seems to fade away entirely as the crisp audio from the video fills the silent room. We hear the sound of dry leaves crunching under heavy boots. Then 2 masked men step into the frame next to him. The audio is shockingly loud and clear. Caleb's voice echoes from the sleek tablet across the mahogany table. "Break the glass and scare her, but make sure the kids are locked away first," he says on the recording, his voice completely cold and calculated. The video shows him pulling a thick envelope from his pocket and handing it directly to the taller masked man. "Make it look like a professional hit, so the cops blame her business," he adds, pointing a finger directly at my back patio door. I sit perfectly still, watching the faces of my family as the reality of the video sets in. Caleb's smug, arrogant smirk evaporates instantly. The blood drains entirely from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly under the warm chandelier light. His mouth opens slightly, but no words come out. His eyes dart wildly around the room, looking for an escape that does not exist. The silence at the table is deafening. Then a sharp crash shatters the quiet. Jasmine drops her expensive crystal champagne flute. It hits the hardwood floor and shatters into a dozen pieces, splashing expensive champagne across Caleb-polished leather shoes. Jasmine is staring at the screen, her eyes wide with absolute horror. She looks from the tablet to her husband, her chest heaving as she struggles to comprehend what she just watched. My mother Yvonne is the first to break the silence. Her maternal instinct to protect her golden child-perfect life kicks into overdrive. She aggressively reaches across the table and tries to push the tablet away. "This is a fake," Yvonne stammers, her voice high and frantic. "This is some kind of artificial intelligence trick. Chloe is a computer nerd and she is just jealous. She fabricated this entire video to frame Caleb and ruin your family, Jasmine. Do not look at it." My father. Calvin nods quickly, backing up my mother. Desperate delusion. "You have gone too far. Chloe," Calvin says, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "Creating fake evidence is a federal crime. We are calling the authorities right now and having you arrested for this sick stunt." I do not raise my voice. I do not show a single ounce of fear or intimidation. I simply lean back in my heavy wooden chair and let out a soft, chilling laugh. "I did not fake the video, Mom," I say, my voice ringing with absolute lethal clarity. "Just like I did not fake this." I reach down into my leather briefcase and pull out the thick stack of paper containing the decrypted text message logs from the burner phone. I toss the heavy stack directly onto Jasmine's empty porcelain dinner plate. The papers slide across the smooth ceramic and stop right in front of her shaking hands. "Read them, Jasmine," I say, keeping my eyes locked on her terrified face. "Read the exact text messages your perfect husband sent to the violent thugs he hired to terrorize your children." Jasmine's hands are trembling so violently she can barely pick up the first page. She stares at the printed text logs, her eyes scanning the brutal exchange of messages. She reads the timestamps matching them to the exact moments she was dumping her children on my front porch. She reads the negotiation of the $10,000 cryptocurrency payment. She reads the explicit instructions Caleb gave the criminals to smash my door and orchestrate a violent assault while her 6-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son were sleeping just upstairs. The realization hits Jasmine like a physical blow to the chest. The glamorous illusion of her high society marriage shatters completely. She realizes that Caleb did not just stage a fake break-in to get back at me. He actively put her own children directly in the line of fire. He risked their physical safety and emotional well-being just to cover his own tracks. He used his own son and daughter as disposable pawns in a sick, twisted game. Caleb tries to reach over and snatch the papers from her hands. "Jasmine, do not read that garbage," he pleads, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "She hacked my phone. She planted those messages. It is all a setup to destroy us." Jasmine slaps his hand away with vicious force. "Do not touch me," she screams, her voice echoing off the walls of the private dining room. "You hired men to break into the house while Trey and Kayla were inside. You put our babies in danger." Yvonne tries to intervene, reaching out to comfort Jasmine, but my sister pushes her away too. The entire facade of their perfect upper-class Atlanta lifestyle is collapsing in real time, right in front of the restaurant waitstaff, who are peeking through the frosted glass doors. But I am nowhere near finished dismantling their lives. "You do not just owe the police an explanation for the staged assault." "Caleb," I say, cutting through the chaos at the table. I reach into my briefcase one final time. I pull out the thick, heavy manila envelope containing the commercial loan foreclosure documents. I drop the envelope onto the center of the mahogany table. It lands with a heavy, authoritative thud. "You also owe me $3.2 million. The entire table freezes. Calvin stops trying to comfort Yvonne and stares at me in absolute bewilderment. $3.2 million. Calvin repeats, his voice hushed and confused. "What kind of insane nonsense are you talking about, Chloe?" I lean forward, resting my forearms on the table, and look directly into Caleb's terrified eyes. You all thought my cybersecurity firm was just some tiny little internet business? I say, my tone dripping with absolute authority. You thought I spent my days fixing Wi-Fi routers and hiding from the real world. You grossly underestimated me. My firm is one of the most lucrative corporate defense contractors in the entire American South. We protect the digital assets of billionaires and massive conglomerates. And this morning, I used my extensive corporate wealth to legally buy every single piece of your defaulted commercial debt. Caleb's face turns a sickening shade of gray. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. He knows his secret financial crimes have just been dragged out into the blinding light. I legally acquired the $3 million loan you defaulted on last month. Caleb, I continue, ensuring every word lands like a precise hammer strike. I am currently your absolute largest creditor. And because you are in severe long-standing default, I am officially foreclosing on your entire fabricated existence. I own the debt on your 6-bedroom mansion in Alpharetta. I own the debt on your 2 imported luxury cars. I own the remaining equity in your fraudulent consulting business. Jasmine turns to look at Caleb, her mouth hanging open in pure shock. What is she talking about, Caleb? Jasmine demands, her voice trembling. What defaulted debt? We have millions in the bank. You just closed that massive international deal. There is no international deal, Jasmine, I say, answering for him. There was never a romantic marriage-saving vacation to Europe. The two of you have been hiding in a luxury hotel right here in downtown Atlanta because Caleb is facing a sealed federal indictment for wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. He has been stealing money from his investors to fund your designer clothes and your luxury cars. You are entirely broke. You are drowning in over $4 million of debt. And the federal government is preparing to seize everything you have. Jasmine looks like she is about to physically collapse. She stares at Caleb, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to spin another beautiful lie to protect her fragile ego. But Caleb says absolutely nothing. He just stares at the foreclosure documents on the table, his chest heaving with panicked, shallow breaths. He orchestrated the home invasion tonight because he needed a police report stating I was an unfit guardian. I explained, connecting the final pieces of their toxic puzzle for my horrified parents. He needed to prove to a family court judge that the children were in imminent mortal danger, so he could force an emergency dissolution of their $8 million generational trust fund. He was going to steal his own children money to pay off his angry investors and escape federal prison. Jasmine lets out a guttural, agonizing scream. It is not a dramatic performance for social media. It is the raw, visceral sound of a woman realizing her entire identity has been a complete and utter lie. She turns on Caleb, slamming her fists against his chest. You lied to me, she screams violently. You told me we were rich. You told me you had everything under control. You endangered our babies for a payout. Caleb tries to grab her wrists, trying to silence her, but she fights back, scratching at his expensive suit. Yvonne bursts into frantic tears, burying her face in her hands as the reality of her own poor choices sets in. She secretly took out a second mortgage on her own home to fund a fake European vacation for a man who is actively fleeing the federal government. Her money is gone forever, completely wasted on a fraudulent son-in-law. Calvin sits frozen in his chair, his authoritarian posture completely shattered. The proud, wealthy patriarch of the family has just been exposed as a gullible fool who backed the wrong daughter. His threats to cut me out of the family trust are entirely meaningless now. I could buy and sell his entire net worth before breakfast, and he knows it. The restaurant is dead silent, except for Jasmine, hysterical sobbing, and Yvonne frantic crying. The wealthy patrons in the main dining room are definitely listening to the spectacular collapse of our family. Caleb finally finds his voice. His arrogant facade is completely gone, replaced by the pathetic whining of a cornered coward. Chloe, please, Caleb begs, his voice shaking as he looks at me. We can work this out. We are family. You have the money. You can clear the debt. You can make this all go away. I will do whatever you want. Just please do not take the house. Do not let the feds take me. I look at him with absolute disgust. The man who stood on my front porch and mocked me for having no life is now begging for my mercy. The man who told me I was about to lose everything is now realizing he has already lost it all. I do not negotiate with criminals. Caleb. I say, my voice ringing with absolute lethal clarity. You tried to send me to prison to protect your fragile ego. You treated me like a disposable asset. And now you are going to pay the absolute maximum price for your entitlement. I lean back in my chair and cross my arms, looking at the shattered remnants of my highly toxic family. The private dining room is a disaster zone of broken crystal, ruined reputations, and exposed felonies. But I am still not completely finished. The financial execution was just the preliminary phase of my revenge. The real consequences are waiting right outside the door. I watch Jasmine as she frantically flips through the foreclosure documents, her perfectly manicured nails tearing at the crisp white pages. She reads the legal terminology. The bank seals the defaulted amounts. Every single page is a nail in the coffin of her high society illusion. She looks at the itemized list of collateral and realizes that the designer bag she flaunts online, the luxury SUV she drove to my house, and the very roof over her children's heads are all legally owned by the sister she has bullied and belittled her entire life. The poetic justice is absolutely magnificent. For decades, Jasmine had paraded around Atlanta, acting superior, because she married a white man with a shiny corporate title. She used her mixed family as a status symbol, a weapon to make me feel inadequate and unwanted by our parents. She had basked in the golden child glow, soaking up all the financial resources and emotional support my parents had to offer while I was left in the dark to fend for myself. She thought her fake wealth made her invincible. She thought she could use people and discard them without ever facing a single consequence. And now she is sitting in a private dining room in Buckhead hyperventilating as her entire reality burns to ash. Her husband is a fraud. Her wealth is a mirage. Her parents are financially compromised because of her lies. The devastating truth is a bitter pill, and I am forcing her to swallow every single drop of it. Calvin finally manages to pull his eyes away from the documents and looks at me. The usual arrogant glare is completely gone from his eyes. He looks old, tired, and entirely defeated. Chloe, he says, his voice barely a whisper. How could you let this happen? Why did not you tell us he was in trouble? We could have helped him quietly. We could have protected the family name. Even now, even as the absolute truth is staring him in the face, my father is still trying to blame me. He is still trying to protect the family reputation over the safety of his own grandchildren. I stare at him, feeling the last remaining shred of daughterly affection die inside my chest. I did not let this happen, Dad, I say coldly. Caleb did this to himself. And you enabled him. You supported his arrogance because you liked showing him off at the country club. You were so obsessed with having a perfect, successful son-in-law that you completely ignored the massive red flags. You threw me to the wolves to protect a criminal. You threatened to cut me off financially if I did not submit to your abuse. Well, look at your golden child now. Look at the monster you spent your entire life protecting. Yvonne cries harder, burying her face in Calvin's shoulder. The realization that she mortgaged her own secure future to fund a criminal enterprise is crushing her. She traded her own financial stability to buy fake love and fake status. They have all reaped exactly what they sowed. Caleb is breathing heavily, his eyes darting frantically toward the frosted glass doors of the private dining room. He is a cornered animal, realizing the trap has fully snapped shut. He stands up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I am leaving, he says, his voice trembling with panic. I am not staying here to listen to these lies. I am calling my lawyers and we are going to sue you for everything you have, Chloe. You cannot do this to me. He turns toward the door, ready to make his desperate escape into the warm Atlanta night. He thinks he can just walk away from the mess he created. He thinks he can run back to his hotel and figure out a new scam to avoid the federal indictments. But he is entirely wrong. I do not move from my chair. I simply watch him take his first step toward the exit, a calm, satisfied smile resting on my face. I know exactly what is waiting for him on the other side of that door. The financial execution is complete. The total annihilation of his life has been delivered. All that remains is the cold, hard reality of the justice system. I watch Caleb take that single arrogant step toward the frosted glass doors, thinking he can just walk away from the destruction he caused. He truly believes his fake corporate status will shield him from the consequences of his violent actions. He reaches out his hand to grab the brass handle, but he never even gets the chance to touch it. The heavy wooden doors suddenly swing open from the outside, pushing Caleb backward. Standing in the doorway is Malik, my business partner, looking absolutely immaculate in his tailored dark suit. Malik steps into the private dining room with the calm, collected energy of a man who just successfully executed a flawless corporate takedown. He looks at Caleb with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. But Malik is not alone. Stepping in right behind him are two tall, broad-shouldered detectives from the Atlanta Police Department. Detective Jackson is leading the way, his gold badge flashing under the warm glow of the expensive crystal chandelier. The atmosphere in the private dining room shifts instantly from chaotic panic to absolute frozen terror. The wealthy patrons out in the main dining area have stopped eating entirely, trying to peer through the open doorway to see what the commotion is about. A few waitstaff members are lingering near the corridor, holding trays of expensive food, completely captivated by the drama unfolding at our table. These are the exact type of high society people my parents spend their entire lives trying to impress. And now they are all front row witnesses to the spectacular collapse of the fake empire my sister built. Caleb stumbles backward, bumping into his velvet dining chair as the detectives march straight into the room. Their heavy boots thud against the hardwood floor, leaving no room for negotiation or escape. They do not even glance in my direction. They do not look at my parents or my sister. Their eyes are locked dead onto Caleb, treating him like the dangerous criminal he actually is. Caleb tries to put on his charming white-collar executive persona, but his voice shakes violently. "Officers, there is a massive misunderstanding here," he stammers, raising his hands in a placating gesture, trying to smile his way out of a federal crime. "This is just a private family dispute that got a little out of hand. My sister-in-law is just very emotional tonight." Detective Jackson does not slow his pace. He does not entertain the gaslighting for a single second. He steps right up to Caleb and grabs him firmly by the shoulder, spinning him around roughly and forcing his arms behind his back. "There is no misunderstanding, Caleb," Detective Jackson says, his voice carrying the heavy weight of absolute legal authority. "We have reviewed the high-definition surveillance footage and the decrypted communication logs provided to us this evening. You are under arrest." The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking tightly around Caleb's wrists echoes loudly in the silent dining room. It is the sound of absolute finality. Jasmine lets out a horrified gasp, covering her mouth with her trembling hands, her diamond rings catching the light. Caleb struggles slightly against the grip of the two detectives, pulling against the cold steel binding his wrists. But they hold him firmly in place, right there next to the remnants of his expensive dinner and his discarded extortion documents. "You are being charged with felony conspiracy to commit assault, filing a false police report, and severe child endangerment." Jackson continues reciting the charges with cold precision, his voice loud enough for the patrons outside to hear. "We are also working in direct coordination with federal authorities regarding your outstanding warrants for wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The reality of the situation finally crushes the last remaining pieces of Caleb's arrogant facade. He is no longer the rich, powerful husband. He is a broke, desperate man going to prison. His knees buckle slightly under his own weight, and the detectives have to hold him up by his arms to keep him from collapsing onto the hardwood floor. He looks over his shoulder at Jasmine, his eyes wide with raw, desperate terror. "The man who sneered at me on my front porch, the man who told me I would lose everything, is now entirely stripped of his power. Jasmine, call my lawyer." He begs, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine that makes him sound like a frightened child. "Call the firm right now and tell them I need emergency representation. Tell them to freeze the offshore accounts before the feds get everything we have left." But Jasmine is not moving to help him. She is backed into the far corner of the dining room, her back pressed hard against the expensive textured wallpaper. She is hyperventilating, her chest heaving rapidly as the massive scope of their criminal reality crashes down on her. She realizes in this exact moment that she cannot call a lawyer because they have absolutely no money left to pay for one. She realizes that the federal wire fraud charges mean the government already knows about the fake consulting businesses she used to wash the stolen investor funds. She is not just an innocent bystander. She is entirely complicit in his financial crimes. She is not just losing her fake luxury mansion and her imported cars tonight. She is looking at the very real possibility of facing her own federal indictment and serving years in a federal penitentiary right alongside him. The perfect golden child image she spent her entire life cultivating is completely demolished. The high society friends she constantly bragged about will abandon her the second they see. Caleb mugshot broadcast on the evening news. The exclusive Atlanta circles. She desperately clawed her way into Will's shun her forever. She is completely ruined, and she knows it. The realization breaks whatever bond she pretended to have with her husband. I am not calling anyone. Caleb Jasmine screams between jagged, gasping breaths. Her voice shrill and panicked. You ruined my life. You told me the money was clean. You told me we were safe from the audits. I am not going to prison for your lies. I am not losing my children because you hired thugs to attack my sister. Calvin sits frozen at the table, staring in absolute horror at the handcuffed man he used to proudly show off at his exclusive country club. His perfect, successful son-in-law. The man he always compared me to is being dragged out of a Buckhead restaurant like a common street criminal. Calvin realizes that his own reputation is permanently tainted by association. The proud patriarch who threatened to cut me off financially just 30 minutes ago is completely powerless to stop the police from taking Caleb away. He cannot bully his way out of this. He cannot buy his way out of this humiliation. His entire worldview built on appearances and superficial wealth has been burned to the ground. He looks at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and newfound terror, finally realizing exactly who I am and what I am capable of doing. The detectives begin to march. Caleb toward the door, pulling him away from the table. He is still begging Jasmine to help him, dragging his feet against the floor, but she refuses to even look at him, turning her face toward the wall. As they pull him past my chair, my mother Yvonne suddenly snaps out of her shocked paralysis. The sight of her son-in-law in handcuffs, the destruction of her daughter's perfect life, triggers a violent emotional reaction. She bursts into frantic, hysterical tears. She scrambles out of her dining chair, knocking over a crystal water glass that shatters against the floor, and rushes toward me. She grabs my arm, her fingers digging desperately into the fine silk sleeve of my designer suit. Chloe. Please, Yvonne. Begs, her face stained with running mascara and desperate tears. You have to stop this right now. Tell the officers it was all a terrible mistake. Tell them you will withdraw the video evidence and drop the charges. We can handle this quietly as a family, just like we always do. Please, Chloe, you cannot let them take him away in handcuffs. Think about the family loyalty. Think about what this will do to our reputation in the community. Her grip on my arm tightens, her fingernails pressing into my skin as she continues to plead. People will talk. We will be ruined. Jasmine will lose everything. You cannot do this to your own sister. We are your family, Chloe. You have to protect us. She is literally begging me to save the man who paid criminals to assault me in the dark, all to preserve her fake social standing. She expects me to fall back into line, to be the obedient, invisible daughter who sacrifices her own safety to fix their mistakes. I looked down at my mother's hand clamped around my arm. For most of my life, that grip would have worked. I would have heard the panic in her voice, seen the fear on her face, and immediately started calculating what I could sacrifice to make the family comfortable again. Money, time, dignity, silence. I had surrendered all four before. Not tonight. I slowly removed her fingers from my sleeve one at a time and stepped back. Family loyalty, I asked. The words were quiet, but the room went still around them. Even Jasmine stopped crying long enough to look at me. Calvin lifted his head. Yvonne stared as if she could not understand why the phrase that had controlled me for decades suddenly had no power. You want to talk to me about family loyalty after what happened in my house, I continued. Jasmine left two frightened children on my porch after I clearly said no. You blocked me from reporting it. Dad threatened me with money to force me into obedience. Caleb paid criminals to break into my home. Then both of you stood in front of police officers, looked at the blood on my face, and lied about me so he could take the children and build a false case. Yvonne opened her mouth, but I raised one hand. No. You have had 32 years to explain yourselves. Tonight you listen. Her lips closed. I turned toward Calvin. He looked smaller than he had that morning in the precinct parking lot. His shoulders were slumped, and the commanding expression he used to control every family conversation was gone. You told me you would cut me out of the family trust if I embarrassed Jasmine, I said. You expected me to panic because you still think I am the daughter who needs your approval and your money. I told you then that I did not need it. You did not believe me. I tapped the foreclosure documents still spread across the table. Now you understand. Your trust is not leverage over me. I could buy the assets inside it before breakfast and never notice the difference on my balance sheet. I kept my success private because I wanted a life that belonged to me. You interpreted privacy as failure. You interpreted restraint as weakness. And because you needed Jasmine to remain the golden child, you built an entire family mythology in which I had to remain the disappointment. Calvin swallowed hard. Chloe, he said we made mistakes. Mistakes, I repeated. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. A mistake is sending money to the wrong account. You watched your injured daughter stand in front of police officers and told them she was unstable because telling the truth would have made Jasmine look bad. That was a decision. I turned to Yvonne. You mortgaged your home to finance their fantasy, I said. Then when that fantasy started collapsing, you tried to make me pay $100,000 and sign a false confession so the lie could survive a little longer. You were willing to risk my freedom to protect their reputation. Yvonne's face crumpled. I was trying to keep this family together, she whispered. No, I said. You were trying to keep the hierarchy together. There is a difference. Jasmine made a broken sound from the corner. Her makeup was streaked down her face. One hand was pressed to her mouth as she stared toward the door where the detectives had taken Caleb. Do not act like you are better than all of us, she snapped suddenly. You planned this. You bought his debt. You brought the police here. You wanted to humiliate me. I looked at her for a long moment. I wanted you to stop using me, I said. You could have done that on my porch this morning. You could have taken your children home when I said no. You could have called Caleb back when you learned I was going to the police. You could have told the truth when men broke into my house. Every step after that was a choice you made because you were certain I would eventually surrender. She shook her head violently. You are taking my children away from me. Your choices put your children at risk, Jasmine, not me. I opened my briefcase again and removed a thin folder I had deliberately kept separate from the financial documents. I placed it on the table in front of her. Child Protective Services already has the abandonment timeline, I said. They have the group chat messages showing that you left after I refused. They have the police records from the home invasion. They have the evidence that Caleb hired the attackers, while Trey and Kayla were inside the house. They also have the financial records showing the trust fund was part of the motive. Jasmine stared at the folder but did not touch it. I am not deciding custody, I continued. A court will decide what protects those children, but neither you nor Mom nor Dad is going to erase what happened by calling it a private family matter. Yvonne moved toward me again, but this time she stopped before touching my arm. Chloe, please, she whispered. We can fix this. We can sell something. We can hire lawyers. We can explain that Caleb manipulated everyone. Jasmine did not know everything he was doing. That may matter to her lawyer, I said. It does not restore my trust. Calvin finally stood. His chair scraped across the floor. We are still your parents. I nodded once. Biologically, yes. The words hit him harder than shouting would have. For years you taught me that being family meant I had obligations to you, while you had discretion about whether I deserved protection, respect, or fairness. I do not accept that contract anymore. I am not financing the mortgage. I am not paying Jasmine's legal bills. I am not paying Caleb's debt back to myself. I am not using my company to make charges disappear. And I will not lie to a detective, a prosecutor, CPS, a judge, or anyone else to make this family look respectable. Yvonne started crying again. What are we supposed to do now? For once I said deal with the consequences of your own decisions. The waiter appeared cautiously at the edge of the private room holding the bill folder. He had clearly been waiting for a safe moment to approach. I almost felt sorry for him. This had probably become the most uncomfortable table in the restaurant. I reached into my purse and removed my black card. Jasmine noticed it immediately. So did Calvin. Their eyes followed the card as I placed it on the bill. It was a tiny gesture compared with everything else that had happened, but I saw the last piece of their old picture of me collapse. Daughter, they called unsuccessful, lonely, and dependent, was paying for the dinner where their entire financial illusion had been exposed. Keep the change, I told the waiter when he returned the card. Then I stood and closed my briefcase. Jasmine looked up at me. Chloe, she said, her voice suddenly stripped of anger. What am I supposed to tell Trey and Kayla? The question stopped me for half a second. Tell them the truth, I said. Start there. I looked at Yvonne and Calvin one final time. I did not hate them. Hatred would have required me to carry them with me. What I felt was cleaner than that. It was the absence of obligation. Do not call me for money, I said. Do not come to my house. If investigators contact you, tell the truth. If you choose another lie, you will deal with that one too. Yvonne whispered my name, but I was already walking toward the frosted glass doors. Behind me, I heard Jasmine crying, Calvin speaking in a low, stunned voice, and Yvonne asking nobody in particular how everything had gone so wrong. I did not turn around. The restaurant outside the private room was still filled with soft music, quiet conversations, and the ordinary clink of silverware. People looked up as I passed, then returned to their dinners. For them, it was just another Thursday night in Buckhead. For me, it was the first night of my life in which the word family no longer meant surrender. 6 months later, the broken glass in my house had been replaced, the walls had been repaired, and every legal file connected to Caleb occupied its own encrypted archive instead of my daily thoughts. The case had moved faster than anyone in my family expected because Caleb's crimes did not begin or end with the men he sent to my home. Once investigators connected the staged break-in to the financial records, the burner phone messages, the false police report, and the existing federal wire fraud investigation, his carefully constructed life collapsed from every direction at once. Caleb eventually accepted a federal plea rather than take the combined evidence to trial. By then, prosecutors had traced the investor money, the shell accounts, and the transactions he used to keep his luxury image alive. The assault conspiracy and false report evidence made his position even worse. He was serving time in federal prison, no longer wearing tailored suits or checking whether strangers noticed his imported watch. The man who had built his identity around appearing untouchable had discovered how quickly an image disappears when records, witnesses, and money all point in the same direction. Jasmine avoided prison at that stage, but she did not avoid consequences. Investigators spent months determining what she knew about Caleb's fraud and when she knew it. Her social media accounts went quiet almost immediately after the restaurant. The glamorous photographs disappeared. So did the sponsored posts, the rented cars, the designer shopping trips, and the endless captions about living an abundant life. The mansion in Alpharetta went into foreclosure under the debt my company had legally acquired. The imported cars were surrendered. The consulting business that Caleb used as the centerpiece of his successful executive persona was stripped for whatever legitimate value remained. Jasmine moved into a small apartment and took a retail job that paid by the hour, while her lawyers dealt with the financial investigation and the civil claims following the fraud. The first time I learned where she was working, the information did not come from a family member. It appeared in a routine legal update because her employment affected one of the financial disclosures in the case. I read the line once and closed the document. I felt no satisfaction imagining her behind a register. The victory had never been about making Jasmine poor. It was about making sure she could no longer finance a fantasy by consuming everyone around her. My parents lost their house 3 months after the restaurant. The second mortgage Yvonne had taken out to support Jasmine and Caleb had been far more dangerous than either of them admitted. Without the repayment they expected from Caleb's imaginary business success, the numbers became impossible. They tried restructuring. They tried borrowing from relatives who had spent years praising their generosity. They even left several messages on my phone asking me to discuss a temporary family loan. I deleted every message without answering. Not because I wanted them homeless, because I finally understood that rescuing them would recreate the exact system I had spent my life escaping. They had used money as a reward, a punishment, and a leash. If I stepped in with my own money the moment their decisions produced consequences, nothing fundamental would change. They would simply learn that Chloe's boundaries could still be purchased with enough guilt. Yvonne and Calvin moved out of the social circle they had spent decades trying to impress. Country club invitations stopped. Friends who had happily attended Jasmine's parties became suddenly unavailable. Their reputation had always mattered to them because it confirmed the story they told about themselves: successful parents, perfect daughter, prosperous son-in-law, beautiful grandchildren, respectable family. Once the fraud case became public, that story no longer survived casual conversation. They blamed me for a while. Then they blamed Caleb. Then, according to the few legal messages I had to receive, they started blaming each other. I stayed out of it. Trey and Kayla were the only people I continued to worry about. The family court did not return them to the chaos they had been living in. After reviewing the abandonment evidence, the staged break-in, Caleb's criminal case, and Jasmine's unstable financial situation, the court placed them with a responsible aunt on Caleb's side of the family who lived out of state. I did not know her well, and I deliberately kept my involvement limited. The children needed routine more than they needed another adult turning their lives into a battlefield. Through my attorney, I arranged a college fund for each of them. The structure was anonymous and locked down, so neither Jasmine nor Caleb could borrow against it, redirect it, pledge it as collateral, or use it to support another emergency. The money could be used only for the children's education when they were old enough. I did not tell Trey or Kayla about it. Not yet. I did not want gratitude. I wanted them to have one resource in their future that no irresponsible adult could steal from them. I sent them birthday gifts through the approved family channel and kept the notes simple. No criticism of their parents. No explanation of the case. No attempt to make them choose sides. They had already been forced to absorb enough adult selfishness for one childhood. My own life became quieter in ways I had not expected. At first, I kept waking at 2 in the morning and checking the thermal cameras, even when no alerts had triggered. I would stand in the hallway remembering the flashlights, the shattered glass, and the sound of boots on my floor. My security systems had protected me, but technology did not erase memory. Over time, those nights became less frequent. I stopped interpreting every car slowing near my driveway as a threat. I stopped checking my phone for family attacks the moment I woke up. Most importantly, I stopped rehearsing arguments with people who were no longer in the room. My company expanded during those 6 months. The Caleb situation had never become a marketing story. I refused to turn my private trauma into corporate publicity. But the same discipline that carried me through the investigation carried into work. We won new contracts, hired another security team, and moved part of our operation into a larger downtown Atlanta office with a view that stretched across the city. One afternoon, I stood at the windows watching sunlight reflect off the towers when Malik walked into my office carrying a black folder. "You might want to sit down for this," he said. I turned from the skyline. "Is that good news or expensive news, both?" He placed the folder on my desk and opened it to the signature page of a new multi-million-dollar corporate defense contract. 6 months earlier, he had answered my call after 3 in the morning and helped me buy the debt that exposed Caleb's vulnerability. Now he was grinning because our firm had just secured one of the largest legitimate contracts in its history. I read the number twice and looked up at him. "Not bad for someone who supposedly spends all day fixing routers," I said. Malik laughed. "I thought you were never going to let that line die." "Probably not." After he left, I stayed by the window for a few minutes, with the signed contract resting on my desk behind me. Atlanta moved below in every direction. Cars filled the streets. Office lights flickered on as afternoon turned toward evening. Somewhere in the city, my parents were rebuilding a life without the status they had worshipped. Somewhere else, Jasmine was learning what ordinary responsibility felt like. Caleb was living with the consequences of believing every person around him could be manipulated, and I was not responsible for fixing any of it. That realization mattered more than the house, the black card, the acquired debt, or the new contract. For years, I thought freedom would arrive when my family finally understood my value. I had imagined some perfect confrontation in which they admitted they were wrong and apologized for every time they chose Jasmine over me. Freedom did not require their understanding. It required my decision. I had survived their attempt to turn my own home career and silence against me. I had protected the evidence, protected myself, and refused to let their version of family erase the truth. Their arrogance had created the opening for their own collapse, but I did not build my future from revenge. I built it from boundaries. I looked once more over the skyline, then returned to my desk and opened the new contract. There was work to do, and for the first time in a very long time, every hour ahead of me belonged entirely to me. The greatest lesson from this entire ordeal is that family loyalty should never be a weapon used to demand your silence or your sacrifice for decades. I allowed the title of family to bind me to people who only valued my utility, not my humanity. They mistook my quiet endurance for weakness, assuming I would always fold under the heavy pressure of their deeply entitled expectations. But toxic behavior does not become acceptable just because you share genetics with the perpetrators standing up for yourself is not a betrayal. It is an act of profound respect for yourself. True freedom begins the exact moment you stop seeking validation from people committed to misunderstanding you. You do not owe your resources, your peace, or your future to anyone who willingly puts you in harmful situations to protect their own fabricated image. Building your own empire means realizing that your absolute worth is never defined by those individuals who deliberately try to tear you down. Have you ever had to cut off highly toxic relatives to finally protect your own peace, safety, and sanity? Share your personal story in the comments section below. Hit that like button.